and welcome back to Scottish Independence Podcasts. This week we have a new guest, Rowan Aitchison, who is going to be telling us about a new campaign group that's been set up called Our Power. We've been very interested in energy ownership for some time, so we're delighted to invite Rowan into the studio to tell us more about the campaign.
Welcome everyone. Today we have a guest with us who is from a group called Our Power. So Rowan, thanks so much for coming on. Really pleased to have you. And I think this came about because I can't remember if it was TikTok or Instagram, but I'd seen one of Our Power's posts and thought, oh, that looks interesting. Went off and looked at your website, went back on to write to say a message to say, that's interesting, do you fancy talking to us? And then Matt, your colleague, had in the meantime messaged us and said, that looks interesting, any chance we can talk? So it's nice when those sorts of kind of haphazard, but it turned out all right in the end. So Our Power then, tell us what it is and, and what your job or role, maybe more role, is in it. And we'll take it from there.
Fantastic. Yes, thank you very much for having me, firstly. It's great to be here. And great that you reached out to Matt. I can't take any credit for anything on TikTok, but I'm glad that you guys are on TikTok. I'm sure it's a better place for it. So Our Power is a coalition campaign around the future of Scotland's energy, a renewable energy campaign for the Scottish Government to do much more in terms of ownership. So the ownership at the moment of renewable energy in Scotland is very concentrated. It's very privatised, and the wealth that is generated is disappearing out of Scotland into the pockets of shareholders, of CEOs, and not staying in the areas where the energy and money is being generated. So that is what Our Power is here to talk about and try and change. And it's a coalition, quite a broad coalition of organisations that have come around the table with the same idea to push the Scottish Government to make some policy changes in that direction. And it's great. So far, going really well. We only launched in April, so we're expecting quite a long sort of run at this, a year and a half to a bit longer. And my role is that I'm the campaigner for Our Power, which means I'm coordinating quite a lot of the movement building work going on, but also across some of the politics and policy work as well.
That's quite a neat overview, I think. And we actually have the video that you guys produced.
Here in Scotland, we've got a proud industrial heritage, a highly skilled energy workforce, and some of the best renewable resources anywhere in the world. And why is so much of the wealth generated going elsewhere? And what about the jobs? It's in our power to change this. The Scottish Government can make sure that we get our fair share of our energy wealth. It could boost our public finances. Denmark, Ireland and Sweden all stand to gain more in revenue from public investment in Scottish wind projects than Scotland. Why are we missing out? Our energy could be funding local services and supporting communities, just like they do in Orkney. So why aren't more communities able to do this? It could create more jobs and stronger businesses by building and securing a manufacturing base here in Scotland that would actually deliver the long-promised jobs. Why are we still relying on imported kit? All of this is within the Scottish Government's power now. Our Power is calling on the next Scottish Government to make sure that Scotland's energy wealth benefits us all. That means public stakes in renewable energy so that the wealth generated goes to public services and local communities. That means building it in Scotland and creating a secure wind manufacturing base and the good jobs that go with it. Communities in Scotland are leading the way. Other countries already do it. So let's take this opportunity and get things right.
So
nice.
Aspirational stuff there. Nothing there that we would disagree at all. I think my first question is the one that I think probably people are shouting at the screen already. Schedule 5 of the Scotland Act, which says that the generation, transmission, distribution and supply of electricity is reserved. Therefore, the Scottish Government cannot do any of those things. So getting that out the way first, I think my next question is, what is it that you think is within the power of the Scottish Government that you'd actually like them to be doing?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And it is frustrating. Some of this energy policy is held in Westminster, which is a long way away from some of the communities that are hosting some of the energy generation up in the northwest of Scotland primarily. So this campaign is devolved. So it's about what Scottish Government can do. And there is actually quite a lot that they can do. For example, they could take equity stakes in offshore wind. The ScotWind licensing round that happened 2022-23, there was no public equity stakes. So the Scottish Government didn't take a part of that into public ownership. It was sold as a license, like the oil and gas licenses have been.
Are you talking about some kind of arm's length body owning it? Sorry,
my understanding is that the Scottish Government could invest in the ScotWind licenses as they were given out as a conditionality, not to own. So they could have taken equity stakes at that point.
Equity stakes are different from ownership then, are they?
I think it's the same thing, but I think that that's my understanding of it. It would be interesting to get more detail on that.
Something worth checking for sure. But anyway, carry on. I'm sorry, I interrupted you just because that immediately popped into my mind when you said that. So
you were telling us, how you hope to influence ScotGov, and that would be one example of it. I mean, are there other things? Yeah.
Yeah. So one of the other demands is around local authority ownership, which is much easier, I think, so they can own assets, and some of those could be wind farms, and that's already happening in Orkney, where they're hoping to earn £5.5 million a year from 3 wind farms to put into the local council's coffers to pay for essential services. And then the last one is also community ownership. So lots of communities own renewable energy assets, and they do very well out of them, but they also put that money back into public benefit in various forms, some for alleviating fuel poverty, for planting trees on the Outer Hebrides. There's an out of hours ferry service from Bressa. There's all sorts of things that the people in those places want that are paid for from community-owned wind turbines. The manufacturing is the last piece of the puzzle for us. Is if the renewables jobs are to be fully realised in Scotland, you've got to be making some of the kit here rather than importing all of the kit. So that's more about an industrial strategy.
Yes.
For Scotland.
And are there barriers to them doing that now, or is it just the choices that have been made? Is it procurement policy, or why do you think it's not happened?
There's a rich and complex history, as I'm sure you'll appreciate, around manufacturing in Scotland. There's a huge amount of economics of where it's cheapest to do it. So it is something that you have to persuade or force developers to act on, rather than something that would make the most economic sense, or it's not the cheapest place to do it, I guess, is the bottom line. But you can do that through conditionalities when you're giving out these licenses. That is the route that we'd be looking at. And the businesses that used to do that are still around. There's a few that produced a lot of the North Sea oil and gas infrastructure in terms of welding up rigs, and the technology and skills are not very different. Granted, that was probably 30 years ago now. So the workforce is needing to be redeveloped to get into offshore wind.
Yes, I mean that's what I was thinking when you were saying that it's not as if we haven't done that before with obviously with the oil boom in the 70s, 80s, but I mean it carried on after that for quite a long time. So it is a bit frustrating that there hasn't been more of I was going to say a smoother transition into renewables, but to be fair, there's also a gap because oil industry had definitely started to wane a bit before the renewables came into the situation it's in just now. But it is frustrating, all of that. One of the things I picked up from on your website, and when you're talking about community ownership, was mention of 20% community ownership. So there's a new renewables, presumably wind, but any other thing. And I've heard energy spokespeople from the SNP using the same figure, 20%, to aim for. And my response to that was, it seems very arbitrary. Why 20%? And then another question that came out of it was, it's probably related, is that, well, if you do have a community ownership and say it is 20%, does that mean there's 20% less profit for whoever, does own the renewables? And does that make the whole thing less profitable? So kind of see where I'm going with that?
Yeah, definitely. It's interesting. I don't know where the 20% figure came from specifically, but it's shared ownership that I think you're speaking about, which is where a developer will take the majority stake and the responsibility for developing a project, and at some point during that development offers out to a community that's either nearby or a group of communities to buy into that wind farm, for example. It's normally onshore wind, and they then get the financial benefit for whatever percentage they buy in. There's several ways to do it, and I think the most common example is shared revenue, where you purchase a share in the revenue of the company that operates the wind farm, which is generally a subsidiary of a larger company, to get that proportion of the profits to the community. And so whether that is the 20% number from shared ownership has come from the Scottish Government saying that the best practice principles should be for 20% to be offered to communities. Now, that is slightly different to given. It's not free, and it's slightly different to best practice principles are guidance, not legally binding. So there's an onus there on a developer to be proactive in offering, and then also proactive in making it a deal that the communities would want to take on. If they're offered a 20% stake at commercial rates towards the end of a development project, you're not going to see much return to the community, because the margins between borrowing and income generated are quite tight. If you get in quite early with shared ownership and you co-create or co-own before planning, before grid, before all of these processes that the wind farm has to move through, then it's much more likely that you'll get better rates on your investment. So there's a sort of tension there between commercial developers and the communities. The bottom line is that developer would get less profit if the community was owning it. And it's what they do in Denmark. So the first round of onshore wind in Denmark, the government made it a condition to offer out to communities shares in these new developments. And as a result, in sort of the early to late 2010 to 2015, something like that, there was half of all onshore wind in Denmark was citizen owned, which is phenomenal compared to, I think, in 2024, there was 0.2% that was in shared ownership.
It's a big ask for communities, isn't it, though? Especially if they've got to come up with not only agreement, but funding. And I hear what you're saying about the earlier you can do it, the better. But almost everything's stacked against the community at that point, isn't it? Is there any sign of us making any headway for communities or helping them through that process?
Yeah, well, it's where I came into this work was through a shared ownership project, actually. So this is my sort of background, interest and passion in terms of trying to deliver for a local community that I worked for the Development Trust of, and then looking out at the opportunities for a single turbine of community, like wholly owned single turbine, and the economics just not stacking up in the energy market as it stands. And then looking at a commercial development and seeing how they were making it stack up, and thinking, if we could take a bit of that away from the developers and have it community owned, we'd be in the same financial economies of scale and access to grid and all of that they are, which is obviously profitable because they wouldn't be doing it if it wasn't. So the logic makes sense to pair and bundle communities in with commercial projects.
Yeah.
The barriers do still exist, and the main barriers are in finance, trying to get the money to put that together. They're in having enough community capacity early on, and for those community groups or community organizations that are around a development to all get on board with the same idea and messaging. And some community groups might not want the wind farm to happen at all, so there's tensions there that need navigated, and doing all of that with no money and no staff time as a bunch of volunteers is tricky. We've been there. So
yeah, very much so. Yeah.
I bet. So if we go back to Denmark again, and what you were saying there about so much of that being citizen owned because they were offered, I think you said, shares early on. So is that basically just the company who are developing it offered shares in the project in the same way that, you know, you could buy shares on the stock market, but they were offered to citizens, or I don't know if it was just even local citizens. So is it basically from the point of view of, you know, if I was over there and living in a wee Danish village and there was a wind farm coming up either offshore or on land, would it just be like I'd buy shares in it? And so relatively easy to do, but could stack up if a lot of individuals do it? Is that how it was, or was it something a bit more, a bit trickier than that?
Yeah, that is generally the model. They have various models of public ownership. So there's this example that we're talking about, which is individuals getting the opportunity to buy in, and they buy in as individuals. It's actually quite common in Nordic countries, especially in forestry, that individuals will buy a block of forestry and they will see that planted and then grow up. And oftentimes people do it if they've got a bit of money when they've just had a kid, and then in the future the return is the crop, and that gets harvested and off they go to university with a pocket full of cash. It's that kind of Scandi thinking that was applied to the wind farms, where they knew that it was a long-term project and they asked citizens if they were interested, and they had predictions on returns, and lots of people said, oh yeah, we'll be up for that, you know, that's the future, and put money in as individuals for a return on their investment. It's not necessarily the most public ownership that you can get. You'd have to have money in your pocket to be able to invest. So there's a real barrier there. Whereas what we're talking about with public ownership through public bodies like councils, like the government, or through community groups that are always asset-locked charities or companies limited by guarantee, they wouldn't have a barrier to who would benefit from the return on investment. It would be for the public good, whether that goes through a community organisation, whether that goes through your local council or through the government. It's avoiding some people get richer while other people get poorer.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I heard an example of, I think it was in the Borders, and it was a company where people had offered shares. They'd bought a turbine and they were offering out shares, and in return people got a cheaper rate of electricity. But none of those people lived in the Borders. You know, the people who were benefiting from it was whoever had the money. They could be anywhere, you know, and this is a thing that I think it's a really difficult line, isn't it? Making sure that the community that benefits is the right one or the right people in it, because so much of our assets in Scotland seem to be increasingly foreign owned, and then of course the profits flow offshore rather than benefiting us in Scotland. And then you've got the other side of the coin, which Marlene and I were talking about as well. You've got a lot of people living in cities who might like to take part in this, might be able to support it, might want to benefit from it, but don't have a wind farm anywhere near them because of where we put wind farms. So it's not just as simple as a community sticks up a wind turbine and Bob's your uncle, is it? It's quite complicated.
It's really interesting, the example of offshore wind with the ScotWind licensing round. So 12% of that was sold to public energy companies, but from other European nations. So there's a real appetite for what we have, which is the resource, the offshore wind. We're laughing there. We've got an abundance of the resource, but the people who benefit in that example are the equivalent of the NHS in Denmark, in Sweden, in Germany, in France. And the people of Scotland and our NHS are hemorrhaging money and in real need of support. But we don't
And
have
in fuel poverty while we're at it, yeah.
Yeah,
It is infuriating. It's absolutely infuriating.
isn't it? And I mean, I came across this just the other day when I was thinking about speaking to you. It's a report by the Ferret, and done an investigation, and it's a Trump donor who's a multimillionaire, billionaire, I think, and he, as the headline says, a Trump donor has snapped up a slice of Scotland's wind, and his name's John Malone, and he's bought a wind farm in Ayrshire, so I presume it's just getting going. I'm not quite sure how far along it's got, but it's kind of like this guy's just come in, and the fact that he's a Trump donor doesn't help him. At least it doesn't help him in my mind. That is the kind of thing that is so frustrating, because in a way, if it was just a choice between does the money go to a guy who's likely to siphon some of it off to President Trump, or does it go to the Danish NHS? Well, actually, I would rather that it went to the Danish NHS, but I'd really rather is that it went to our NHS or our kind of community projects. And it's just, frustrating hardly covers it, does it?
Where do we have to start to make some sense of this? So, because at the moment I get the sense that some communities are being quite proactive and having a look at community wealth building, all these good things, and some of them are finding it easier than others. Some of them are leading the way for others. But in terms of a coordinated strategic approach for the benefit of Scotland, I haven't seen anything that I would describe as that. Have you? Are you aware of anything?
It's not coming naturally from the Scottish Government as yet. I think it will become a focus, hopefully, with this campaign helping it along its way. One of the areas that you've pointed out is the Community Wealth Building Bill, which should provide guidance to local authorities. And we are really pushing for the guidance to be quite explicit about energy ownership, so that when councils get this added thing that they have to do, which is build community wealth, they could do it through procurement of school meals, or they could do it through other means, but they could also look at which energy projects are coming up in their area where the council could get involved, spend a bit of money. Councils have cheaper borrowing rates as well, so they can borrow from central government to pay into these kind of projects. Or as Orkney have, they got money from the UK government. I think it was the National Wealth Fund. They then spent on this wind farm, and they'll get a return on the investment as well. So the public purse is not doing badly out of this if they are the lender that facilitates these projects to deliver better services that then take strain off the NHS. It's a virtuous cycle if you can get it rolling.
That's a very big, isn't it? So in terms of what your campaign's doing, how are you trying to eat this elephant, if you like? Where are you starting? What's your plan?
It's a good question. Yeah. So we have a few points where we're sort of looking ahead and seeing what might be coming up. One is the Programme for Government, which will be coming out in September. And I think this year's is looking to be a bit of a broader approach that includes the next few years for the Programme for Government. And we're in touch with a lot of MSPs, talking to them about the project and about the opportunity that public ownership and at these various levels. There was a question you asked earlier about how you even begin with such a large challenge of private ownership being so well embedded. I think you have to take it at the community level, at the local authority council level, and at the top level of government in Scotland. So you can't win or expect to win just through community ownership or just through national ownership at the Scottish Government. It has to be all of it all at once, and then probably some more in a way that we haven't thought of yet. So it's trying to take it like that. Programme for Government this year is sort of the first approach, and we'll really be ramping up for Programme for Government 2027 to try and shift the needle on this.
Just thinking when you were talking there, Rowan, well, two things. Local authorities would have to start thinking outside the box, and it's never easy to get anyone to think outside of the box. So this, I'm not sort of saying like get coming down on them, but we'd have to think outside the box. But really, you you need to be able to put a very good economic argument to them, don't you? I mean, it's also fair enough because local authorities there, it's my council tax and, I want to know it's being used in a decent kind of way. So you do need to kind of put a good economic argument to them. But presumably that's very possible. I mean, you outlined a reasonable one yourself just in a few minutes. And, maybe, obviously that would need to get ramped up for particular projects. But that does sound like it's doable if you can get local councillors behind you. Maybe, I don't know, maybe that might be more of a problem. But what do you think yourself?
I think the economic argument's really strong. If you look at the profits being made in renewables at the moment, it's something over £5 billion over the last 5 years has been made in onshore wind. And the local councils' deficits and the things they need to pay for are going up and up, and the money they've got available is going down and down. So the move towards owning assets that generate an income is a no-brainer in my mind. If you've got a generating asset that you can rely on that is producing something that everyone needs and will continue to need in abundance into the future with everything that's coming over into electrification, it's pretty bog standard supply and demand. If you're the supplier, you're selling your product to the people who need it. And I think we've got to be a bit careful because supply and demand can run away into exorbitant capitalism, and that's not what I'm suggesting.
We want to go, right? Yeah.
So within reason, you're producing something that's useful to society.
So I live in Glasgow, right? So let's assume that, Glasgow councillors get a economic argument put forward for a particular project for, say it's onshore wind. It's not going to be in Glasgow. So say it's up in Sutherland. I mean, it will bring benefit to the local community, my local community, but it's a long way from Sutherland. I mean, to me, from a central Scottish viewpoint, that seems to be fair enough because, the places where all that wind energy can be acquired and fed into the grid doesn't have very many people living in it. So, there's an argument, Glasgow's a long way from Sutherland and where's the benefit to Sutherland? But to turn that on its head, well, you haven't got enough people in Sutherland to put up the money for this, but Glasgow can help you. So is that kind of, do you see that as being okay? Or, do you want there to be, say, Glasgow buys in, but has its own arrangement with local councillors in Sutherland? How would that kind of bit of it work?
Yeah, it's an interesting knotty problem, isn't it? Because the people hosting the infrastructure may not be directly benefiting, and that is definitely the case at the moment. While it's privately owned, nobody's benefiting. So who do we want to benefit in a new system where it is publicly owned is the major question. If it's at a local authority level, I think it's much more expensive, firstly, to run local authorities with a dispersed population in the Highlands, in islands, regions. I come from Argyll on the West Coast, so I know how much the council services have been cut, including school buses and, refuse pickup and all of that. So there's a partial argument there that it's more expensive and the infrastructure's in those places. So maybe the first port of call is to do with those rural places investing, getting some of the benefit, getting back on their feet, and then take it from there. The other one is around offshore wind, which isn't really owned by anyone at the moment. So if you were a Glasgow council wanting to invest and not wanting to annoy the people in Sutherland by saying, well, we're just going to pop a wind farm in your area, hope that's okay, then offshore may be a good solution to that. And it's in nobody's backyard that way. Not that it's completely off and invisible.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't quite thinking, obviously, that we'd be saying to them, we're just going to pop one in your backyard, not in our backyard. I mean, but it was
That's not a mile away from what happens right now with private companies.
It kind of is, except presumably even someone up in Sutherland who wasn't very keen on it would think, oh, well, if we've got to have it, I'd rather it was helping NHS in Glasgow rather than the NHS in, France or Trump's donor or something. But I wasn't quite thinking about that. I was almost thinking, is there a way in which there could be collaboration between a local council, strapped for cash, but also not many people living in it, not many people living in the area, and a local council. Well, Glasgow's also strapped for cash, but it's got a huge budget. And, it maybe has got ways in which it's got a bit more leeway to invest. So I was thinking more of is there a way in which both ends could benefit and have to talk to one another? That's kind of what was in my mind.
You could twin them. You could make some kind of twinning partnership.
Yeah.
It's a really common thing in the rest of Europe as well. That happens all the time. Beyond energy, it happens with hospital, it happens with high schools, where different municipalities that have the same need will collectively decide to put money into a hospital that serves all three or all four or however many the partnership includes. So it is very sensible. It doesn't happen yet in Scotland in terms of one council doing that for another. I think it might also, we were talking about individuals investing, it might fit into that a little bit neater because of the population density of the Central Belt. And that, in my view, isn't the preferred method of fundraising because of the individuals that benefit from that already having the cash to invest. So ideally, some third party like SNIB or like the National Wealth Fund in the UK context would put up the money, and that is public money that's going to be returned to the state through their investment plus some interest of whatever proportion. But that would take out the sort of whose name is on the debt, if you like.
Yeah. I'll just warn you right now, Rowan. Don't get Fiona started on the Scottish National Investment Bank because she's not a fan.
I was fearing to mention them.
In principle, though, they could do that. I mean, I'm not showing much sign of doing it at the moment, but they could do that, and that is a way of helping local communities elsewhere. And it's interesting you saying elsewhere in Europe, you get that. You get local communities say, they cooperate over a hospital project or something. And part of the reason that happens is because their local authorities are so much smaller than ours. Ours are huge in comparison. And I mean, you've probably heard Leslie Ruddock talking at length about how that and the disadvantages it brings to Scotland. But this is another one actually. If it makes it more difficult for different for an authority even to think about operating like that. So that was quite interesting when you. I was quite intrigued when you mentioned that aspect of it.
Yes.
And is there another one I've got in mind is, we've got this ridiculous situation in Scotland where half of Scotland's owned by 430 people. So land ownership, is that also part of difficulty in taking your vision for this forward?
Yes, it plays a huge role. Land ownership and land reform are core to my political beliefs, and I think that's a major issue in any community project, really. An example, there was a report recently around the profits made in onshore wind, and about the community benefit payment from commercial developers of £5,000 per megawatt hour. And they, in theory, are the payment made to the community for hosting this infrastructure in their landscape and in their lived environment. But it turns out that the landowners who actually host the physical turbine hits the ground in their land earn more than the communities on that front. So the same inequality is being driven because the majority, it was 90% of the owners are private companies, individuals or trusts that host this and get somewhere between 190 to 300 million a year in benefits, and the profit for communities from community benefit funds was less than that.
Yeah, and a lot of that's leaking offshore, isn't it, through things like Gresham House?
It was 14 or potentially 18% of that was held in companies that were housed in tax havens as well. So that's another layer on top where the wealth isn't even paying tax. It's just it's going to fund Trump's donors and all of that. That's just a disaster for
wars
people
and
in
things.
Scotland.
It is infuriating, and we almost have to join up our thinking. I mean, already we've talked about land ownership as a strategy, an industrial and economic strategy, community benefit, and then the size of councils. These are huge pieces of work on their own.
It's going to keep me busy for some years to come, I imagine.
More than just you, I'm sure. So how do you see this joining up? Is that something the government has to do, our government, or is it something that your campaign can try and do?
I think that's where coalitions are really important, because we've got a coalition that includes Community Land Scotland, Community Energy Scotland, DTAS, the Development Trust Association Scotland, and Wellbeing Economy Alliance. There's so many key players that have their area of expertise that are working away at this, have been for years.
Yeah.
And they're all aligned on the distribution of wealth from renewables being concentrated in private hands is wrong. We all know that. We can see that.
I was going to interrupt you and say I'm surprised Commonweal's not on that list, because they've done so much work in all of these areas. We would have thought that would have been a natural.
That wasn't an extensive list either. There's lots of other organisations that are on board. That was just the ones I was thinking about that are already involved. Yeah, but there's a huge amount of work that is. I think it's if you look at energy through the lens of energy alone, then you're missing the point, because it's so integral to land ownership. It's so integral to fuel poverty. It's so integral to how communities can build social housing. It's integral to how people transport themselves around the country. It's just a lens to see other things through. And all of those partners of the coalition understand that and are coming to the coalition with something to a particular point of view, but they all agree on the basics of it.
What actions have you got planned? I mean, it might be too early to have taken them very far forward yet, but so they have the coalition. And I mean, for example, I'm just sort of thinking about the Grousemoor Coalition, Revive Grousemoor. And, they worked for a long time. A similar coalition. I mean, to begin with, it was about protecting raptors and how the Grousemoors are managed, but of course behind that there's land ownership and a lot of the things you've just said. So they worked for a long time. Eventually that got some sort of formal acknowledgement in the grouse management bill that went through Holyrood. I mean, I know a lot of people in Revive thought, well, it hasn't gone far enough, but it's a start, and the politicians got behind it, predominantly SNP, Greens, probably a lot of Labour and Lib Dems as well, got behind it. And something's come out of that, and it's taken a long time. I mean, it's interesting now because Revive have kind of swung over to talking more about land ownership as well. So again, it's another example of what you said, but these things are all interlinked. So Revive ended up with a bill that certainly has helped. Do you see something like that maybe coming out of your Our Power coalition, or have you got other things in mind?
Yes, of course. So the biggest ambition is obviously their sort of headlines. So if we say had another ScotWind round in the future that we were selling offshore licenses, if there was a way for the Scottish Government to own or have shares in that generated public income, we'd see that as a huge win. In the councils with the Community Wealth Building Bill, there's going to be guidance produced for local authorities. So to have the ownership be a really important part of that would be a big win for the campaign. The community ownership, at the moment, there are quite a few things that could change in community ownership. One is that the community ownership is defined as community and local ownership of energy, and the and local bit includes these same private estates that have hydros, or they own their own wind turbines, or they're companies or businesses that have put up infrastructure. So separating those out to community and then separately locally owned is a really important piece of work, and if that went through, then that would be a positive step. So there is sort of a range of the really big things would be bills passed through Parliament that would deliver a change in the ownership structure. And then to get us there, we need to do all these small steps that move the needle in a lesser but still important way that delivers something in the long term.
Yeah.
One thing I remember last time we were speaking to folk at Commonweal was about license renewal as another thing. A lot of these licenses will be due to come up for renewal, and they could be renegotiated. And the difference in technology and capability now compared to when the things were first put up is quite considerable.
So the onshore fleet of wind turbines is actually quite old. Some of them are getting on for 20, 30 years and will be replaced in the not too distant future. So there will be this big break of smaller, less efficient turbines being replaced for bigger, more efficient turbines, which would make even more money for the private owners of those same farms. But there's a permission kicks in again, so they need to go and get planning permission again, because wind turbines are temporary structure. They need to negotiate their grid connection because they'll probably be putting more onto the grid. So there's an opportunity, a huge opportunity for swinging ownership away from the private sector at that point, and that's going to be ongoing at the same rate as the wind farms were built in the early 2000s, 2010s. So that's something we're really focused on. And there's a pilot at the moment the Forestry Land Scotland have for communities that are interested in taking on ownership of those sites that are less than 50 megawatts. So if we were to expand that to the whole of the forestry estate, FLS estate, then that would be a great step. And there are some wind farms that are coming up as soon as 2033 to be repowered that need action around owning those. That
does seem to me to be the easier route, perhaps, because it's not sort of starting from scratch. It's converting something that's already there at a point at which another decision has to be made. And the advantage of doing that is it's at a point when the people operating it currently want something from us. So you've got a bit of power, because the rest of the time we don't have any. I mean, literally, our power is not is not in our hands. The thing
hanging fruit.
Yeah, the low-hanging fruit, and we don't have to renationalise the whole lot in order to benefit from it. Although personally, I would prefer if we did renationalise the whole lot. Shall we mention you've got a petition going? Is that still open, the petition?
So there'll be a series of ways that people can get involved in this. We're building out a sort of movement building strategy at the moment, but the first thing is the petition. So you can sign up to the petition, and then the second thing will be enabling people to send a letter to their MSPs about this. And then there'll be a parliamentary reception of some kind in Holyrood that we'll try and get folk along to. And it's sort of building momentum with people first. Then eventually there'll be hopefully this engaged and riled up body of the public that really care about this.
I just signed it this morning, actually, so I'm quite happy to go along as a riled up member of the public. Fiona and I are quite good at doing riled up members of the public.
We could be angry pensioners when we want to.
Angry pensioners as well. So, I mean, has there been a good response to the petition?
Yeah, I don't actually have the numbers, but it's been popular, and the outreach over social media in particular has been driving people towards the website and the petition.
We'll put the links in the notes to this podcast then, if people want to know more. I mean, I must admit, I haven't signed it yet because I kind of wanted to hear what you had to say first.
Of course, that's very fair.
And which I thought it was fair, yeah. And my first query was, are we aiming this at the right government, given how few of the levers the Scottish government holds? So is there an equivalent sort of pressure on the UK government, or are we just focusing on Scotland at the minute?
This campaign focuses on Scotland. There is a lot of pressure on the UK government around energy policy generally, and energy pricing and how they determine what electricity should cost. There were a few bills going through Parliament, Westminster Parliament last year and the year before around energy, and there was suggestions around zonal pricing, around detached decoupling the price of electricity from gas.
Yeah.
It's been a big talking point, of course, with Labour government, GB Energy being formed, and the role that that will play in whatever that becomes.
Well, all 13 people that it employs in Scotland.
Yeah,
Exactly.
they'll be moved to Manchester. That'll be what happens.
That'll be in the north. Yeah, it'll be in the north. That'll be Northern number 10 North GB Energy, I think. Could see that.
GB Energy
Sorry.
number 11.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, we just don't know. I think there's been so much turmoil south of the border that it's exciting in some ways. It's up for grabs. In other ways, you never know what's coming around the corner, and you want to prepare for a reform government that, we want to set our wins in stone rather than pushing for the biggest wins that then get completely torn down in the next few years, if that happens.
Or even worse, Miliband was waving a plan of 5 nuclear power stations that he wanted to put all the way down the Scottish coast. I mean, how dare these people do that? Yes, I'll send you it. Oh, I was furious, absolutely furious. Well, it's a long list of things I'm furious about, but that's certainly on it. But yeah, quite agree. We need to be up and running before down south gets a Farage government. I firmly believe we won't be part of that parliament by then, but
I suppose now that we've got on to talking about the possibility of a Farage government being elected by the English, right? Because we're talking first past the post general election, so I'm sure they would get votes in Scotland, but they're not likely to get many seats. But anyway, if we're talking about that, then it must be clear to you, Rowan, that with a name like Indie Podcasters and Scottish Independence Podcasts, that what our main thrust is to think in terms of Scotland being independent, and then all the things we could do differently. Of course, a lot of what you've been talking about, especially when we're talking about how these things are intertwined, and unpicking them is a huge job that will need to be done. So from our point of view, from anyone's point of view that wants Scotland to be independent, it's a big job whether you're independent or not, but you've got more levers and more power if you're independent. So you're focusing just now on ScotGov as it is, with the powers that it's got. But I mean, do you kind of see, further into the future, where if that changes, some of what you want maybe becomes more feasible more quickly?
Independence and who holds the energy policy does have a huge impact, especially on this renewables build out and the ownership of that. We don't, because we're a coalition campaign, we don't have a line on independence as a campaign itself. Yeah. We have to be fairly neutral, if you like. But if that did come to pass or happened, it would change the campaign drastically, and we'd pivot towards very different tactics, I imagine. We are where we are at the moment, and we have to work with the powers they have. And I think that was a very conscious choice to focus on the Scottish Government, because although they are more open in their language, maybe towards ownership, and especially community ownership, and they've had targets for quite a long time, the progress has not been in step with what we would like to see in terms of community ownership or shared ownership of renewable energy coming online. It's definitely still a corporate takeover, and the money is leaving Scotland. Whether it's to people that are shareholders of these big companies, or the energy itself that's going down south. I mean, that's neither here nor there, really. We need to take control over who owns the assets that are generating this electricity and money.
And I think the Scottish Government have been a little bit guilty of, and I kind of get it from their perspective, they are prevented from doing so many things by the Scotland Act that they're going, well, that's it, I can't do that. But actually, there's ways around some of them, and we've spoken about some of them in this conversation here. And ownership, who is the vehicle that owns the power? It doesn't have to be the government. It can be something the government sets up, or it can be councils, or it can be communities. The point is that it's us, as opposed to Gresham House or offshore Canadian teachers' pension schemes seem to do very nicely out of Scotland.
Mr. Trump's pal that's going to give him some of the profit.
No reason not to try, not to get going now.
Absolutely. And we think the real benefit is in Scotland being independent. But in the meantime, as you've been pointing out, Our Power campaign and others like it, there's a lot that could be done in the meantime to just push things along. And I mean, I think it's great that you've got this going, and I was quite impressed with the long list of people and groups that are involved, because there's quite a spread of them with different interests. And if something comes out of that, that's brilliant. That'll be for the benefit of everyone in Scotland,
Yeah.
and if in the future there's more things to do, well.
For people who are interested in knowing more, what's the best way for people following your progress or getting involved? Or
So the social media and the website is our main areas at the moment, and then all the partners as well are worth following on social media, and they'll be letting everyone know what is going on. The main push for general public hasn't really started yet. There'll be much more visibility of the campaign once we've sort of got ourselves up and running a bit firmer. But writing a letter to your MSP is the next step, and that will be coming out in the next few weeks, month. If you sign up to the newsletter and all of that sort of online, sign the petition even, then you'll be on the list then for future asks from us.
Yeah,
Right.
Yeah. I mean, I noticed after I'd signed it this morning, I got an email pretty quickly back. I mean, there wasn't anything in the email that I could do immediately, but there's obviously, I'm now on your list, and when something happens, then presumably you'll let me know. So yeah, it's great. We'll keep in touch and hope to see what emerges.
yeah, you can come back and tell us more once you get going.
Yeah, of course.
So thanks again to our guest, Rowan Aitchison, and we'll definitely be following up.
Things are very complicated, and you try and unpick something to do with energy, but you immediately have to start talking about who owns the land, whether it's Scottish Government or pressure groups like Our Power or Commonweal. How do you kind of get in there and unravel it enough to be able to go forward? It's a big job, but it was a good conversation. I enjoyed it.
As you said at the beginning, Marlene, I hadn't realised just how new they are. Some of the campaign activity is yet to really get going, but it's good to have made contact with them this early, because we'll be able to follow their progress, and hopefully Rowan will come back into the studio.
Yeah, and there is a petition that's up and running, and we'll put the link in for that.
Thanks for listening, everybody. Hope you enjoyed that. Don't forget to subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. And if you're listening on YouTube, you can click the little bell and you get a reminder whenever we put out a new episode, which is every Friday.
And sign up for our mailing list. You can do that from the website. And we always send one out at the beginning of each month to tell you what's happening. Last but not least, you can buy us a coffee on coffee.com.
And we'll catch you later. Bye now.